The dust swirled, a fine red veil settling on everything. Even the hope Elena clutched fragilely in her heart. It coated the rough-spun fabric of her dress, settled in the lines exhaustion had etched around her eyes, and seemed to mock the vibrant blue of the sky stretching over the hardscrabble Kansas settlement. Her hands, calloused from work but gentle by nature, tightened on the small wooden bird she'd carved for little Samuel, her son, whose laughter felt like a phantom limb now, an ache where joy used to be. Samuel was safe, thank the heavens, safe back east with her sister, away from this unforgiving land and the shadow that had fallen over his father. Jedediah. The name itself tasted like ash in her mouth. He'd changed. The land did that to some men, or perhaps it only revealed the bitterness hidden deep beneath, the optimism that had carried them west, chasing whispers of prosperity whispered on the wind, had soured into a gnawing resentment, curdled by failed crops, relentless sun, and long, thirsty summers. The man who had once sung her praises now only counted her perceived failings, his voice rougher, his eyes harder, shuddered. The tenderness that had been the bedrock of their life had evaporated like morning dew under the relentless prairie sun, leaving behind a brittle, unpredictable anger that cracked far too easily. She'd learned to tread carefully, to measure her words, to stifle the questions that rose like bile in her throat. Still, she had stayed. For the memory of the laughing man he'd once been, the one who'd held her close under starry skies and promised forever. For the sacred promise sworn before God, for the desperate, foolish hope that the next season, the next rainfall, the next stroke of elusive luck would somehow bring back the Jedediah she had loved and lost somewhere on these unforgiving plains. That fragile hope had finally shattered 3 days ago. He'd stumbled home smelling heavily of cheap whiskey and a deeper desperation that clung to him like the dust itself. His face was a mask of grim, evasive purpose. He hadn't met her eyes. Couldn't meet them. Pack a bag, Elena, he'd mumbled, already turning away. His shoulders slumped, not just with weariness, but with a crushing weight she couldn't yet name. Just a few things. We're moving on. Got us a stake, a chance, in redemption. There was a flicker in his gaze then, quickly extinguished, guilt. Fear. It chilled her more than his harsh words ever had. Redemption. The name itself was a cruel, hollow joke. A notorious town, squatting like a bloated tick on the edge of the territory, known far and wide more for its rowdy saloons, shadowed alleys, and the scent of violence than for any sort of salvation. Whispers spoke of fortunes lost overnight, of men vanishing without a trace, of deals struck in darkness that cost more than coin. Why there? What kind of stake could they possibly have in such a place? She'd questioned him then, her voice trembling despite her resolve. Jedediah, what stake? We have nothing left. The last of the seed money, it's gone, isn't it? And Samuel. The thought of bringing her innocent boy to a place like redemption sent a wave of nausea through her. Samuel stays put, he'd snapped. The words like stones hurled from a distance. His voice was too loud, too defensive. He's better off where he is. Safe. I got us a chance. I told you. A man named Barlow. He's setting us up. A new venture. The lie was thin, almost transparent. Barlow. She'd heard the name whispered before, linked to shadowed dealings and ruin. Fear, cold and sharp as a winter wind, pierced through her confusion. She saw it then, in the desperate avoidance of his gaze, the frantic clenching of his jaw, the tremor in his hands as he turned away. He wasn't taking her to a new life. He wasn't taking her to opportunity. He was taking her away. But why? And what debt could possibly necessitate such a desperate, degrading move? The unspoken questions hung heavy and suffocating in the small cabin air. The journey westward was mostly silent, a tense, stifling quiet, punctuated only by the rhythmic creak of the wagon wheels and Jedediah's terse, infrequent commands. He flinched from her touch, deflected her tentative questions about this Barlow and the new venture with vague mumbles or outright hostility. The landscape blurred past, miles upon miles of unforgiving prairie that mirrored the growing desolation in her soul. Jedediah drove the horses hard, a strange urgency in his movements, as if fleeing something more than just their failed homestead. Redemption wasn't a town, it was a festering wound on the face of the plains. Raw lumber buildings leaned precariously against each other, their facades painted with a false, garish cheer that couldn't quite hide the grime and decay beneath. The air hung thick and heavy with the cloying smell of stale beer, cheap perfume, stale sweat, and an underlying current of raw despair. Elena's stomach churned. This was no place for a fresh start. It was a place where hope came to die. Jedediah pulled the weary horses and creaking wagon to a halt before the largest, gaudiest building, the Gilded cage. Pink paint, faded and peeling, clung desperately to its wooden siding. Lace curtains, yellowed and torn, hung limply in the upper windows like forgotten shrouds. Rough laughter and the tinny strains of an out-of-tune piano spilled out onto the dusty street. A portly man lounged on the porch railing, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust with practiced ease. He wore a stained silk vest stretched taut over a considerable belly, and his eyes, small, shrewd, and predatory, swept over Elena with a slow, deliberate appraisal that made her skin crawl and her blood run cold. This had to be Barlow. He radiated a greasy, self-satisfied menace. Got the merchandise. Jedediah. Barlow's voice was slick, smooth like oil on stagnant water, carrying easily over the noise from within. Jedediah wouldn't look at her, couldn't look at her. He climbed down from the wagon, his movements stiff, jerky, like a poorly made puppet. She's here, fit and ready. The words sounded torn from him. Merchandise, Elena whispered again. The word, a physical choke in her throat. The awful truth slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. Jedediah, what does he mean? Tell me. He finally turned, forced himself to face her. But the man looking back was a hollow-eyed stranger, gutted by a decision already irrevocably made. It's the only way, Elena, he rasped, his gaze skittering away from hers, focusing somewhere over her shoulder. Debts. I had debts. Gambling. Bad investments. Barlow here. He cleared 'em, paid 'em off. For you. The world tilted violently, the dust motes dancing in the harsh sun, the leering face of Barlow, the peeling pink paint, it all swam in a sickening, nauseating vortex. Sold. Her own husband, the man she had pledged her life to, had sold her, like livestock, like a sack of grain, like property. The word tore through the fragile remnants of her world, a silent, ragged scream trapped behind her clenched teeth. She felt suddenly, terrifyingly empty, adrift in a nightmare made real. Barlow chuckled, a dry, rasping sound devoid of humor, full of malice. She's a bit green around the edges, but pretty enough. Spirited, maybe. Might fetch a good price once she's broken in. Learned the rules. He reached out, his fingers thick, stained yellow with nicotine, and brushed a stray curl of her sun-lightened hair from her face. His touch felt like slug slime. Elena flinched back violently, as if burned, a gasp escaping her lips. Jedediah didn't move, didn't protest, didn't even flinch at the implication. He simply took the small, heavy pouch Barlow tossed him, the clink of coins obscenely loud in the sudden, charged silence. He didn't count it. He didn't look back as he scrambled onto the wagon seat, didn't acknowledge the strangled, heartbroken sob that finally tore itself free from Elena's throat. He just flicked the reins with frantic haste, the wagon lurching forward, leaving her standing alone in the swirling red dust, betrayed and utterly, terrifyingly alone, facing the garish pink door of the gilded cage like the gaping entrance to hell itself. He didn't even look back. Barlow grabbed her upper arm, his grip bruisingly tight, inescapable. "Welcome home, sweetheart," he sneered, his breath smelling of stale tobacco and whiskey. He began to drag her towards the swinging doors, towards the noise and the stench within. The heavy doors slammed shut behind her with a dreadful finality, sealing her fate, extinguishing the last flicker of prairie sunlight and hope. The gilded cage was aptly, cruelly named. Inside, faded red velvet, tarnished brass fixtures, and chipped mirrors desperately tried to mimic luxury, but only emphasized the underlying decay and desperation. Women with eyes as old and weary as the prairie itself sat slumped in ornate chairs, their painted smiles fixed and brittle, failing entirely to reach the hollowness within. Some stared blankly into space. Others forced flirtatious banter with rough-looking men clustered around small tables or leaning against the long bar. The air was thick with the stench of cheap perfume trying to mask unwashed bodies, stale cigar smoke, spilled liquor, and the low, constant murmur of men negotiating prices for flesh and fleeting oblivion. Elena was shoved roughly up a narrow, creaking staircase by a stern-faced, broad-shouldered woman Barlow introduced curtly as Martha. Martha, whose own eyes held no spark of warmth, only a hardened, cynical resignation, seemed to be Barlow's enforcer and manager of the girls. She propelled Elena into a small, windowless room upstairs, barely larger than a closet. It contained only a narrow, stained cot, a chipped water basin and pitcher, and a single hook on the wall. The lock clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing the finality of Jedediah's betrayal and the slamming of the front door. Alone in the suffocating darkness, Elena finally let the sobs rack her body, tears of grief, rage, and terrifying helplessness streaming down her face until only dry, aching gasps remained. Days blurred into a living nightmare. Barlow and the ever-present, watchful Martha began the process of trying to break her spirit. There were threats, veiled and overt. Rough hands pushed and prodded. Cold meals were delivered sporadically. Colder words rained down, insults about her background, her perceived weakness, her uselessness until she learned to earn her keep. They took her simple, worn prairie dress, the last tangible link to her old life, and replaced it with a gaudy, ill-fitting satin gown, emerald green, that felt like a shroud against her skin. They tried to teach her the rules, the sickening expectations, the ways to smile, to entice, to please the rough, often drunken men who frequented the establishment. Elena listened, numbly at first, then with a growing, quiet defiance. She wouldn't fight them physically. She saw how quickly and brutally defiance was punished in the other women, noting the faded bruises on the arms of a younger girl named Lily, whose eyes still held a flicker of terror rather than complete emptiness. Instead, Elena resisted with a quiet, stubborn refusal that emanated from the core of her being. She kept her eyes downcast, but her spine straight. She performed the menial chores assigned to her, endless scrubbing of floors sticky with spilled drinks and mud, washing mountains of stained linens in harsh lye soap until her hands were raw, with meticulous care. but refused to engage, refused to smile falsely, refused to adopt the hollow coquetry expected of her. She thought constantly of Samuel, his bright, innocent eyes, his trusting smile. That image was her shield, her anchor in the storm. She thought of the vows Jedediah had spat upon, the life he had shattered. She wouldn't become one of them, one of the broken dolls with dead eyes downstairs. She couldn't. For Samuel's sake, for the tattered remnants of her own self-worth, her passive refusal earned her punishments. Less food, leaving her stomach aching with emptiness. Longer, harder hours scrubbing floors and emptying chamber pots. Enduring the constant, venomous remarks from Martha, who seemed personally offended by Elena's unbroken spirit, and the resentful glares from some of the other women who perhaps saw her resilience as an unspoken insult to their own brokenness or compliance. Only Lily sometimes offered a fleeting, sympathetic glance when Martha wasn't looking. Some nights, Barlow himself would unlock her door, his bulky shadow filling the narrow frame, his whiskey-laden breath fouling the small, airless space. He'd stand there, looking her up and down, a predatory gleam in his small eyes. He hadn't forced her yet, seeming to derive a perverse, sadistic pleasure from her palpable fear, from watching her tremble, from anticipating the moment her spirit would finally snap under the relentless weight of despair. He enjoyed the power he held over her. "You'll learn, prairie flower," he'd sneer, his voice grating. "They all learn, one way or another, or they break completely, and the broken ones, well, they ain't worth much." He'd trace a stained finger down her cheek, enjoying her flinch, before locking the door again, leaving her shaking in the dark. Elena clung to memories like talismans against the encroaching darkness. Samuel's first hesitant steps across their cabin floor, the clean scent of rain on the parched earth back home after a long drought, Jedediah's laugh, the real one, full-throated and genuine, from long, long ago before the bitterness took root. These memories were her fragile shield, her secret weapon against the suffocating reality of the gilded cage. She learned to make herself small, almost invisible when forced downstairs for chores, to move through the suffocating, tarnished opulence of the main floor like a ghost, observing everything. She saw the casual cruelty of the patrons, the deep desperation etched on the faces of the men seeking solace or power, the hollowed-out existence of the women trapped in this cycle of exploitation, all ruled by Barlow's insatiable greed and Martha's harsh hand. One evening, while scrubbing the saloon floor near the batwing doors, head down, trying to be unseen, she overheard two rough-looking patrons talking in low, urgent tones. Their words were laced with fear and a grudging sort of respect. They spoke of raids, of lightning-fast attacks on outlying settlements or freight wagons, of a particular Comanche warrior whose name was uttered in hushed, fearful whispers, Red Hawk. They said he raided with the fury of a demon, that his attacks were targeted, precise, driven by a thirst for vengeance against specific white men who had wronged his people. Elena listened, a cold dread mixing with a strange, detached curiosity. The world outside the gilded cage seemed every bit as dangerous and unforgiving as the one within, filled with conflicts and hatreds she couldn't comprehend. Weeks bled into a month. Then, too, Elena felt herself fraying at the edges, the threads of her resolve thinning under the constant pressure, the lack of sunlight, the poor food, the ever-present threat of Barlow. Hope was a dying ember, increasingly difficult to keep alive in the suffocating darkness. She rarely thought of Jedediah anymore. The betrayal was too deep, too absolute, a wound cauterized by pain. Her thoughts were consumed by sheer survival, by the precious, bright image of Samuel's face, a distant beacon in the encroaching night. She had to endure. For him. Then came the night the brittle facade of the gilded cage exploded. It started not with a bang, but with a sudden, unnatural stillness that fell heavy and suffocating over the usual raucous din of the saloon. The tinny piano music stuttered and died mid-tune. The loud talk, the forced laughter, the clinking glasses, all ceased abruptly, replaced by a tense, charged silence thick with unspoken, primal fear. Men froze, drinks halfway to their lips, eyes darting nervously towards the swinging doors. The women's painted smiles faltered, replaced by wide-eyed apprehension. Even Martha, standing near the bar, seemed to stiffen. A shadow fell across the batwing doors, long and imposing in the flickering lamplight. Then the doors burst inward, splintering violently off their rusted hinges, crashing against the inner walls. Standing there, framed against the deepening twilight, was a figure that seemed carved from the prairie wind and raw fury itself. He was tall, whipcord lean, his skin the color of burnished copper. His black hair hung long and unbound, save for a single, striking hawk feather tied securely into a braid that fell over his shoulder. His eyes, dark and piercing as obsidian shards, swept the room with an intensity that seemed to suck the very breath from the air, missing nothing, assessing everything in an instant. He carried a long rifle easily in one hand, its wooden stock worn smooth, its barrel gleaming dully. A formidable, hawk-headed tomahawk hung from a beaded belt at his waist. Streaks of black and red war paint slashed across his high cheekbones and forehead, stark and menacing, giving him the terrifying look of an avenging spirit risen from the blood-soaked earth. This, Elena knew instinctively, was Red Hawk. Panic erupted like a flash flood. Men scrambled backward, overturning tables and chairs in their haste. Some fumbled desperately for concealed weapons. Others simply cowered, shielding their heads. Red Hawk moved with blinding, economical speed, a whirlwind of controlled, lethal violence. He seemed utterly uninterested in the panicked patrons or the terrified women shrinking against the walls. His burning gaze locked onto Barlow, who stood frozen behind the polished bar, his usual bravado vanishing like smoke in a gale, his face turning a pasty, sickly white beneath its usual flush. "Barlow!" Red Hawk's voice was low, guttural, yet it sliced through the ensuing chaos like a honed blade. The name was an accusation, heavy with the weight of years of banked, simmering hatred. Barlow, jolted into action by the sound of his name, uttered like a death sentence, fumbled frantically for the double-barreled shotgun he kept hidden beneath the counter. But Red Hawk was faster, fluid as water, deadly as lightning. A single precise shot from the rifle sent the shotgun clattering harmlessly away across the floorboards, Barlow yelping in terror. Before anyone else could react, Red Hawk vaulted over the bar, landing lightly, silently on his feet. He grabbed Barlow by the front of his fancy, stained vest, hauling him bodily, sputtering and kicking, over the polished wood like a sack of feed. "You remember Nakona," Red Hawk snarled, his painted face inches from Barlow's terrified, blubbering one. The smell of sage and leather and something wild emanated from him, starkly contrasting the saloon's stench. "My sister, the girl whose innocence you stole, whose spirit you broke, the life you shattered," Barlow stammered, terror rendering his words incoherent. I don't know. Business. Just business. Business." Red Hawk's grip tightened like steel bands, lifting Barlow half off the floor, the man's feet dangling pathetically. "You call stealing a life business. You call driving a gentle spirit to despair and death business." The raw agony and fury in his voice were terrifying to behold. Elena watched, frozen near the base of the staircase. the dirty bucket and rag forgotten in her numb hands, the raw power, the righteous, laser-focused fury radiating from the Comanche warrior, was terrifying, yet strangely, hypnotically mesmerizing. This wasn't random, senseless violence. It was targeted, deeply personal. This was the vengeance the patrons had whispered about in fearful tones. This was justice, terrible and swift. Chaos reigned. Barlow's few hired thugs, slow-witted and clumsy, finally tried to intervene. Red Hawk moved like lightning, a blur of buckskin and controlled fury, disabling them with swift, brutal, efficient blows using his rifle butt fists and feet. He never wasted a movement, never wasted a bullet. He seemed focused solely on Barlow, his rage a palpable, almost visible force field around him. In the midst of the maelstrom, Elena saw her chance, a desperate sliver of an opportunity. In the pandemonium, no one was watching her. The back door, the one leading to the filthy alley where refuse was dumped, was usually kept bolted from the inside. But tonight, in the panic, maybe, just maybe, she slipped through the milling, terrified crowd, hugging the grimy wall, trying to make herself invisible. The sickening sounds of the struggle, grunts of pain, shattering glass. Barlow's high-pitched, terrified pleading for mercy, faded slightly as she reached the narrow, dark hallway leading past the small kitchen towards the back. She could hear Martha screaming orders somewhere upstairs, followed by more crashes. Acrid smoke began to sting her eyes and nostrils. A lamp had been overturned in the main room, and flames were beginning to lick greedily at a fallen curtain. Suddenly, a figure loomed in the hallway ahead, one of Barlow's men, reeling, blood trickling from a gash on his temple, but still on his feet, swaying slightly, blocking her path. He blinked, focusing on her through a haze of pain, a nasty predatory grin spreading slowly across his bruised face despite the chaos behind him. "Well now, little bird," he slurred, reaching for her. "Where do you think you're going all alone?" Before Elena could even fully register the immediate threat, before raw fear could paralyze her, a blur of motion erupted behind the man. Red Hawk appeared as if from nowhere, his face a grim mask of concentration. He hadn't finished with Barlow yet. Guttural sounds from the main room confirmed that, but clearly, the commotion, or perhaps the spreading smoke, had drawn his attention. He dispatched the guard with a single, swift, silent blow to the back of the head. The man crumpled instantly, bonelessly, without a sound. Red Hawk turned, his dark, intense eyes falling on Elena. For a breathless moment, they just stared at each other amidst the growing chaos. The smell of smoke thickening, the Comanche warrior, paint-streaked, radiating danger and vengeance, and the captive woman, pale and trembling in her gaudy, torn satin dress. He saw the fear in her eyes, raw and undisguised. But perhaps he also saw something else beneath it, not the hardened cynicism or broken emptiness of the other women in this place, but a core of raw vulnerability, a spark of unbroken spirit stubbornly refusing to be extinguished. He saw the faint bruises on her arms, the inherent dignity struggling against the degrading circumstances. He saw not one of Barlow's willing commodities, but a captive, perhaps as much a victim, in her own way, as his own sister Nakona had been, years ago. His gaze flickered towards the sounds of shouting and crashing from the main room, then back to her, his expression unreadable, carved from stone. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible jerk of his head towards the back door. "Go," he commanded, his voice low, urgent, now. Before the fire spreads, Elena hesitated for only a fraction of a heartbeat. This warrior, this terrifying agent of vengeance, was deliberately offering her escape, She didn't know why, didn't have time to care. She scrambled towards the heavy wooden back door, her fingers fumbling desperately with the thick, rusty bolt. It slid open with a protesting groan. Freedom, or at least the chance of it, lay just beyond. In the dark, refuse-strewn, blessedly empty alley. She risked a quick glance back. Red Hawk was watching her, his stance alert, listening intently to the sounds from the main room. Rifle held ready. He hadn't followed. He hadn't come for her. He had come solely for Barlow and his brand of justice. But in the depths of his dark eyes, just for an instant, she thought she saw a flicker of something beyond the burning fire of vengeance, a shard of unexpected, almost reluctant mercy. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible, lost in the roar of the growing fire, before slipping out into the cool, blessedly clean night air, leaving the chaos, the screams, and the suffocating despair of the gilded cage behind her. The cool night air hit her face, carrying the scent of dust and blessedly distant rain. She ran, her ill-fitting satin shoes stumbling on the uneven, rutted ground of the alley, driven by pure adrenaline and the desperate, primal need to get away, to put as much distance as possible between herself and the hell she had just escaped. She didn't know where she was going, had no plan, only knew that she couldn't stop, mustn't stop. Behind her, a plume of thick, black smoke began to billow and rise from the gilded cage, painting the night sky with angry strokes of orange and red. Red Hawk's fiery revenge was still unfolding, burning away the corruption within. But Elena was free, for now. The alley spat her out onto a deserted, dusty side street. Redemption slept uneasily, most of its inhabitants unaware or perhaps deliberately uncaring of the violent drama unfolding at its rotten core. Elena kept running, guided by pure instinct, skirting the edge of the dubious settlement, heading towards the vast, dark openness of the prairie that stretched out like a silent, black sea under the sliver of a crescent moon. The gaudy satin dress hampered her movements constantly, its cheap fabric catching on unseen obstacles. Tearing further, her breath came in ragged, painful gasps, her lungs burning, a sharp stitch stabbing at her side. Fear was a cold, hard knot tightening in her stomach. Fear of being caught by Barlow's remaining men. Fear of Jedediah somehow reappearing. Fear of the vast, unknown darkness surrounding the town, teeming with dangers both human and animal. She stumbled violently, her ankle twisting, falling hard onto the dusty ground, scraping her hands and knees raw on sharp pebbles. Tears of pain, frustration, and sheer terror welled up, hot and stinging, but she forced them back with a choked sob. Crying wouldn't help. Giving up meant recapture, meant returning to that nightmare, meant failing Samuel. She had to keep moving, pushing herself up, ignoring the stinging pain. She forced her protesting legs to run again, slower now, more cautious, conserving her dwindling energy. She skirted the last few wretched buildings on the edge of town, finally reaching the open prairie. The silence here was immense, different from the tense silence before the attack, vast, intimidating, pressing in on her from all sides. The wind whispered through the sparse grass like secrets she couldn't understand. She was utterly alone, without food, water, or shelter, dressed in attire that screamed brothel escapee to anyone who might find her. Where could she possibly go? How could she possibly survive out here? Despair threatened to engulf her again, heavy and suffocating. She didn't know how long she walked and stumbled. Perhaps an hour, perhaps more. The initial surge of adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that made her limbs feel like lead. Her muscles screamed in protest, Her throat was raw and dry. She had to rest, just for a moment. She sank down behind a clump of scraggly sagebrush, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to make herself small, invisible. Suddenly, the faint but distinct sound of hoofbeats reached her ears, muffled by the distance but growing steadily, purposefully closer. Panic surged anew. Cold and sharp, Barlow's men. Had they organized a pursuit already? Jedediah. She scanned the darkness frantically, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. There was nowhere to hide, just flat, open ground dotted with sparse, low brush under the pale moonlight. She flattened herself against the earth, pulling the torn satin tighter around her, praying the shadows and the sagebrush would conceal her. The rider emerged from the gloom, a lone silhouette against the slightly paler horizon. He rode with effortless grace and purpose, scanning the ground intently as he approached. As he drew nearer, the faint moonlight caught the distinctive hawk feather tied in his hair. It was Red Hawk. He reined in his powerful paint horse a few yards away, the animal snorting softly, its breath pluming in the cool night air. His eyes, sharp and accustomed to the darkness, found her huddled figure almost immediately. He didn't dismount, just sat easily in the saddle, watching her for a long, silent moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Elena remained frozen, every muscle tensed, unsure if he meant her harm. Had he changed his mind? Had he tracked her down to drag her back, perhaps seeing her as a loose end? Or worse, he is dead. Red Hawk stated flatly, his voice calm now. The earlier inferno of fury banked, replaced by a chilling, almost unnerving stillness. Barlow. He paid for Nakona. For my father. He paused, letting the stark words sink into the vast silence. His place. It burns. His men will scatter, but some might look for you. They may blame you for the fire, for the escape, for the money he kept there. Elena swallowed hard against the dryness in her throat, finally finding her voice, though it trembled. Why? Why did you help me? Back there. He shifted slightly in the saddle, his gaze sweeping out over the dark, immense plains before returning to her small figure. You were not meant for that place, he said, his voice low, introspective. I saw it in your eyes. Fear, yes, but not. Emptiness. Not the brokenness I saw in the others. My sister, Nakona. She had eyes like yours, once, before he poisoned her spirit. The admission was quiet, almost reluctant, heavy with remembered pain. Barlow's evil spread like a sickness, letting you escape. It felt like removing some of the poison he left behind. It wasn't mercy, perhaps. Not in the way her people understood it, but a byproduct of his own harsh justice, an unexpected ripple from the stone of his vengeance. He studied her for another moment. Where will you go now? He asked, the question practical, direct. I don't know, Elena admitted, the sheer, overwhelming vastness of her predicament crashing down on her again. Tears threatened once more. Away. East-East, maybe. To my sister. To Samuel. Somehow. Anywhere. But back there. But the journey east seemed impossibly long, impossibly dangerous for a lone woman with nothing. Red Hawk considered her, his dark eyes assessing her torn dress, her scraped hands, the exhaustion evident even in the dim light. He could leave her here. She was not his responsibility, his quest. The vengeance that had burned in him for years, like a slow fire, was finally complete. Barlow was dead. Leaving her would be the sensible thing, the safe thing. He had his own path to follow, his own people waiting. But looking down at her, shivering in the thin, inadequate satin, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her spirit flickering but not extinguished, He saw Nakona again, vividly. He saw the vulnerability Barlow had preyed upon, the innocence shattered, his honor, the Comanche code he lived by, harsh but not without its own complex morality, wouldn't let him simply abandon her to the wolves, whether the two-legged or four-legged kind that roamed these plains. "You cannot survive out here alone," he stated, his tone matter-of-fact, devoid of pity, but full of certainty. "Not dressed like that. Without water, without knowledge of the land, Barlow's men, if they search, know these lands. They will track you easily before the sun is high." He hesitated, a brief internal conflict flickering across his stoic features, then made a decision. "Come." He extended a lean, strong hand down to her. Elena looked at his outstretched hand, dark against the moonlight, then up at his impassive, paint-streaked face. A Comanche warrior. The people her own kind feared, demonized, fought against. Yet, this man, this savage in the eyes of the world she knew, had shown her more kindness, however unintentional or strangely motivated, than her own husband. He was offering her a chance, a dangerous, uncertain one, but a chance nonetheless. Staying here meant almost certain death or recapture, and a fate worse than death. Going with him was stepping into the complete unknown, into a world alien and potentially hostile. Taking a deep, shuddering breath that was part fear, part resolve, she reached up and took his hand. His grip was strong, firm, calloused, pulling her effortlessly up behind him onto the horse's broad, warm back. She instinctively wrapped her arms around his waist for balance, acutely aware of the surprising warmth of his skin through the thin buckskin shirt, the solid, coiled strength of him. The horse shifted slightly beneath them, seemingly accustomed to carrying double. The scent of leather, horse, sage, and wood smoke surrounded her, displacing the foul odors of redemption. "Hold tight," Red Hawk said, his voice close to her ear, sending an unexpected shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the night chill. He nudged the horse forward with subtle pressure from his knees, not back towards the dying embers of redemption, but turning north, deeper into the vast, dark, silent prairie, away from the smoldering ruins of the Gilded cage and the shattered remnants of the life Elena had been forced into. They rode into the unknown, a Comanche warrior whose long-burning vengeance was finally sated, leaving an unexpected void, and a desperate woman escaping a life she never chose. Their fates suddenly, unexpectedly intertwined beneath the vast, indifferent sprinkle of the western stars. The journey began in silence, a thick, charged quiet broken only by the rhythmic, muffled hoofbeats of the paint horse on the grassy earth and the soft whispering of the night wind across the endless plains. Elena clung tightly to Red Hawk, her cheek pressed against the surprisingly supple buckskin of his shirt. She could feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the coiled, latent tension in his lean muscles. Even in seeming repose, he rode with an innate, uncanny certainty, guiding the horse through the darkness as if he could see every dip and rise in the land, every hidden prairie dog hole, every patch of treacherous ground. Fear still gnawed at her, a cold undercurrent beneath the exhaustion, but it was slowly being tempered by a fragile sliver of hope and a dawning, complex awareness of the man she clung to. He was a warrior, undeniably dangerous, capable of swift, brutal violence. She had witnessed it firsthand. Yet, he had spared her, offered her escape, and now offered protection when he could have easily ridden away. There was a profound stillness about him, a deep well of quiet strength and self-containment that was both intimidating and strangely, unexpectedly reassuring after the unpredictable anger of Jedediah and the oily menace of Barlow. She wondered again about his sister, Nakona. about the terrible pain Barlow had inflicted that had fueled such potent, enduring revenge. What had happened to her? What had happened to his father? As the first faint hints of dawn began to paint the eastern sky in pale, ethereal shades of gray and pink, Red Hawk finally slowed the horse's pace. They had traveled many miles, leaving the ugly scar of redemption far behind them. He guided the horse skillfully into a shallow, winding ravine, screened from the open plain by a thicket of cottonwood trees clustered near a small, sluggish creek. Dismounting lithely, silently, he reached up to help Elena down. Her legs were stiff, numb, and cramped from the unaccustomed hours of riding bareback. She nearly stumbled as her feet touched the cool ground, her borrowed satin shoes offering no support. He steadied her instantly with a firm hand on her arm, his touch brief but grounding. "We rest here," he said, his voice low, already scanning their surroundings with keen, alert eyes, missing nothing. "They will track us when the sun is fully up, if they come. We leave no easy trail." Elena looked down at herself, at the ridiculous, torn, filthy emerald satin dress. It felt like a costume from a degrading play, utterly unsuitable for travel, let alone survival on the prairie. She felt exposed, vulnerable, marked. Red Hawk seemed to notice her discomfort, his gaze briefly flicking over the inappropriate garment. Without a word, he turned to his horse and unstrapped a compact buckskin bundle from behind his saddle. He rummaged through it and pulled out a simple, sturdy garment, a tunic and leggings made of soft, fringed deerskin, clearly Comanche attire. They looked worn from use but were clean and well cared for. He held them out to her. "These will be better, warmer, less noticeable." Elena hesitated, momentarily taken aback by the practical, almost casual kindness. "But these are yours, from my pack," he clarified curtly, his gaze shifting away, perhaps uncomfortable with her scrutiny or her gratitude. "Change. Over there." He gestured with his chin towards the thickest part of the cottonwood grove, affording her privacy. Gratefully, Elena took the surprisingly soft clothes and slipped behind the screen of trees and rustling leaves. The satin dress felt like a disgusting, suffocating second skin, imbued with the stench and despair of the gilded cage. She peeled it off with a sense of profound relief, letting it fall onto the ground like shedding a painful, poisonous memory. She kicked it away. The deerskin was unexpectedly soft and warm against her skin, smelling faintly, cleanly of wood smoke, leather, and the prairie itself. The tunic reached her mid-thighs, the leggings fitting loosely but comfortably. It felt strange, alien, yet infinitely better, more real, more practical than the symbol of her captivity. It felt like armor when she emerged, stepping hesitantly back into the clearing. Red Hawk gave a single curt nod, his expression unreadable as his eyes briefly assessed her transformation. He took the discarded satin dress without comment and tossed it into the low embers of a tiny, smokeless fire he had somehow conjured into existence while she was changing. Using dry twigs and a spark from flint and steel, the cheap fabric flared briefly, unnaturally bright, before curling into black, greasy ash. It felt like a symbolic cleansing, a final severing of ties. He offered her water from a skin, cool and slightly metallic tasting, the most wonderful thing she'd ever drunk, and a strip of dried meat. It was tough, chewy, and salty, but deeply nourishing. Elena ate and drank gratefully, her hunger sharp and demanding now that the immediate terror had subsided into aching exhaustion. They sat in silence for a while near the small fire. The only sounds the gentle crackle of the flames, the murmur of the creek, and the chirping of awakening birds in the cottonwoods. The rising sun cast long shadows across the ravine floor. They will follow, Elena murmured eventually, voicing the fear that still lingered like a cold stone in her gut. Barlow had connections, men who rode for him, rough men. I know. Red Hawk replied calmly, his eyes scanning the rim of the ravine. We must keep moving, stay off the main trails. They will expect a lone woman, or even us together, to head east or south, towards settlements. We go north, towards the Llano Estacado, the Stake Plains. Elena had heard the name whispered with apprehension by settlers back in Kansas. A vast, high, arid plateau, a place travelers avoided if they could, known for its terrifying lack of water, its featureless confusing landscape where a man could easily get lost and perish, its sudden, violent storms. It was also known, she recalled with a jolt, as Comanche territory. Comancheria. Why there? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. It is my home, he said simply, as if that explained everything. The home of the Inam, the people. He met her eyes then, his gaze direct, unwavering. And it is the last place they will look for a white woman traveling with a Comanche warrior. He paused, his gaze searching hers. It will be a hard journey, dangerous. Are you strong enough, Elena? Elena thought of Samuel, his trusting face a constant image in her mind's eye. She thought of the degradation of the brothel, the hollowness in the eyes of Lily and the other women. She thought of Jedediah's craven betrayal. Yes, she was afraid, terrified even. But the past days had stripped away layers of her former self, revealing a core of resilience, a stubborn will to survive, that she hadn't known she possessed. Fear was a constant companion, but it no longer paralyzed her. I am, she said, her voice firmer than she expected, meeting his intense gaze without flinching. I have to be. For my son. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a flicker of something akin to respect in his dark eyes. Good. Rest now. We ride again soon. He kept watch, silent and motionless as the rocks around them, while she slept fitfully, curled up near the dying embers of the fire, exhaustion finally claiming her. The unfamiliar deerskin clothes felt strangely comforting, protective. She woke hours later, startled, to the feeling of his hand gently shaking her shoulder. The sun was higher in the sky, filtering through the cottonwood leaves, dappling the ground. Red Hawk was tending to the horse, his movements economical, precise, utterly attuned to the animal and their surroundings. He had already erased most signs of their brief camp, scattering the cold ashes of the fire, smoothing out their tracks near the creek bed with a branch, leaving almost no trace they had ever been there. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man utterly at home in the wilderness, a man for whom survival was an ingrained instinct. They rode north, relentlessly, hour after hour, day after day, deliberately avoiding settlements and well-worn trails. Red Hawk moved with an uncanny, intimate knowledge of the seemingly trackless land, finding hidden seeps of water where Elena saw only dry rock, choosing paths through rocky terrain or dense brush that would leave fewer tracks for potential pursuers. The landscape gradually changed, the relatively lush prairie grasses giving way to sparser vegetation, hardy grama grass, thorny mesquite, prickly pear cactus, and tall, spiky yucca plants. The sun beat down relentlessly from a vast, pale sky, the heat shimmering off the baked earth. Water became scarcer, more precious, rationed carefully from their skins. Red Hawk pushed them hard, always watchful, always aware of the potential pursuit from behind, his senses constantly alert to any sign of danger ahead. He taught Elena basic signs used by his people, a bent twig here, an oddly placed stone there, subtle markers invisible to untrained eyes. Messages left by unseen travelers. He showed her how to stay low on the horse when crossing ridges to minimize their silhouette against the skyline, how to listen to the complex sounds of the prairie, the sharp cry of a hunting hawk, the sudden rustle of an unseen animal in the brush, the buzz of insects, discerning warning from normalcy. He taught her how to read the clouds, anticipating the sudden, violent thunderstorms that could sweep across the plains. Communication between them was sparse, mostly practical, focused on survival. He pointed out edible plants, wild onions, certain berries, the roots of specific prairie flowers, and warned her away from poisonous ones with a curt word or gesture. He showed her how to make a small, smokeless fire using buffalo chips when wood was unavailable. Elena watched intently, learned quickly, absorbed everything with a desperate focus. She was a surprisingly quick study, driven by the absolute necessity of survival, her mind sharp and eager after the numbing despair of the gilded cage. She learned to ride better, moving with the rhythm of the horse, enduring the long, grueling hours in the saddle without complaint, her body slowly hardening, adapting. The soft deerskin clothes became her second skin, far more practical and comfortable than any dress she had ever owned. The pampered softness of her previous life was burning away under the harsh prairie sun, revealing a tougher, more resilient core. Sometimes, during their brief rests or by the small campfires at night, a fragile connection would form. He showed her how to clean his rifle, the movements precise and respectful. She, in turn, used a precious needle and thread salvaged from her abandoned bag back at the cabin, a habit ingrained by her mother to meticulously mend a tear in his buckskin shirt caused by thorny brush. He watched her small, capable hands moving, a flicker of unreadable emotion in his eyes. One evening, huddled by a small fire hidden in a rocky outcrop, the vast silence of the plains pressing in around them, Red Hawk finally broke the usual quiet, his voice low, directed more at the flickering flames than at her. "Barlow, he killed my father," he said, the words stark, flat, stripped of emotion, but heavy with ancient pain. Not with a bullet. He cheated him in a trade, took our entire winter supply of hides and meat, leaving us with trinkets. My father, a proud man, he went to redemption to demand justice, to get back what was ours. Barlow and his thugs, they beat him. Badly, laughed while they did it, left him broken on the trail. He paused, his jaw tight, his gaze distant, lost in the bitter memory. He died before the first snow, from his injuries, from the shame. He picked up a stick, tracing patterns in the dust near the fire. My sister, Nakona. She was young then, full of light. After my father died, our mother grew sick with grief. Nakona went to redemption seeking help, maybe work, anything to get us through the winter. Barlow, he saw her, took her in, promised help. His voice grew rougher, laced with a venomous bitterness. He dishonored her, used her, trapped her in that cage. He spat the word out like poison. She faded after that, like a flower cut from its stem. Her spirit broke. One morning, she walked into the river near the settlement and did not come back. He tossed the stick into the fire, watching it catch flame. My mother grieved herself to death within a year. Barlow took everything, my family, my home, my innocence. He looked up, his eyes meeting Elena's across the small fire, dark pools reflecting the flickering flames and years of carefully nurtured rage. For years, I carried that pain, that hatred. It fueled me. I hunted him, tracked him, waited for the right moment. Last night, it was finally finished. Elena listened, her heart aching with a profound empathy for the boy who had lost everything, for the warrior whose entire adult life had been relentlessly shaped, warped by that devastating loss and the burning need for vengeance. She finally understood the terrifying depth of his single-minded quest. It wasn't just about abstract honor. It was about the complete annihilation of his family, his world, shattered by the casual cruelty and greed of one despicable man. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words feeling hopelessly inadequate but utterly sincere. "So terribly sorry for your loss. Red Hawk, for Nakona, for your father." He looked at her then, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time seeing beyond the white woman, beyond the echo of his sister. He saw not pity, which he would have despised, but genuine empathy radiating from her gaze. He saw that she, too, understood loss, understood betrayal, understood the shattering of a life, a fragile, unspoken thread of understanding stretched between them in the vast, lonely, starlit landscape, woven from shared pain and the harsh realities of survival. Their pursuers finally caught up with them 2 days later. On the edge of the rugged breaks leading towards the high plains of the Llano Estacado, Elena spotted the telltale dust cloud first, a faint, ominous smudge against the clear southern horizon. Growing steadily larger, her heart leaped into her throat. Red Hawk, who seemed to possess an almost supernatural awareness of his surroundings, had seen it too, his body instantly tensing, his hand instinctively going to the rifle resting across his lap. 3 riders, he judged after a moment of intense scrutiny. His eyes narrowed to slits against the glare. Moving fast. Barlow's men, likely, or maybe friends of his, wanting answers or revenge. He wasted no time deliberating. There is no place to hide on this open plain. We must make for the breaks. He urged the paint horse into a sudden, jolting gallop towards a series of rugged, eroded canyons and mesas visible several miles ahead, a jagged scar on the landscape. It was their only chance for cover. The chase was desperate, a life or death race across the sun-baked earth. The pursuers were relentless, pushing their horses hard, gaining ground steadily. Occasional shots rang out, kicking up puffs of dust dangerously close, the bullets whining past like angry insects. Red Hawk pushed the paint horse to its absolute limit, the animal responding with incredible stamina and heart, its powerful legs devouring the distance. He weaved skillfully through patches of thorny brush and around clusters of rock, heading straight for the jagged maze of canyons looming closer. Elena held on tightly, her face pressed against Red Hawk's back, the wind whipping her hair, her heart pounding against his ribs. Whispering frantic prayers, they would reach the shelter of the rocks before the bullets found their mark. They plunged into the labyrinthine network of narrow gullies and dry washes just as the pursuers were closing the distance, their triumphant shouts echoing eerily behind them. Red Hawk reined the horse in sharply behind a towering sandstone outcrop, swinging his leg over and sliding to the ground in one fluid motion, pulling Elena down with him. "Stay low. Keep moving," he ordered curtly, his voice tight with urgency. Pulling his rifle free from its scabbard, he gave the horse's flank a sharp slap, sending the well-trained animal deeper into the canyon network, a decoy to hopefully draw their fire or lead them on a false trail. He grabbed Elena's hand, pulling her along as they scrambled over loose rocks, slid down steep, dusty embankments, navigating the treacherous terrain. Red Hawk moved with astonishing speed and agility, always choosing the path, his knowledge of such terrain clearly ingrained, pulling Elena along when she faltered, her city-bred lungs burning, her legs trembling with exertion and fear. The riders followed, more cautiously now in the broken, dangerous terrain, their frustrated shouts and curses echoing unnervingly off the high canyon walls, magnifying the sound, making them seem closer than they were. Red Hawk suddenly pulled her behind a dense cluster of large boulders, jumbled at the base of a cliff face, shoving her into a narrow, dark crevice hidden between two massive rocks. In here, stay down. Stay absolutely silent. No matter what you hear, he positioned himself at the edge of the opening, partially concealed, but with a clear line of sight back down the wash. Rifle resting steady on a rock ledge, waiting with lethal patience, melting into the shadows. Elena huddled in the cool darkness of the crevice, pressing herself against the rough stone, holding her breath, her ears straining. She listened to the clatter of hooves on rock growing closer, the rough curses of the men searching for them, their voices bouncing off the canyon walls. Minutes stretched into an eternity, each heartbeat echoing painfully loud in her ears. One rider passed agonizingly close to their hiding spot, peering suspiciously into the shadows, his face hard and cruel. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, praying he wouldn't see them. He cursed under his breath and moved on, further up the wash, following the tracks of the riderless horse. Then, Red Hawk acted. As the last of the three riders, this one younger, cockier than the others, passed their position. Red Hawk stepped out from the shadows, silent as a hunting cat. Before the man could even register the movement or turn his head, Red Hawk struck, not with his rifle, but with the hawk-headed tomahawk snatched instantly from his belt. It was a swift, brutal, disabling blow aimed at the man's side, not meant to kill but to incapacitate. The man gave a choked cry and tumbled heavily from his saddle, landing in a heap in the dust. The other two riders, hearing the commotion, spun their horses around, raising their own weapons. Red Hawk was already back behind the boulders, raising his rifle. He fired, the shot echoing like a thunderclap in the confined space. His aim was precise, deadly. One of the riders yelled in pain, clutching his shoulder, his horse rearing violently in panic. The other man, startled and furious, fired wildly in their direction, bullets ricocheting dangerously off the rocks near Elena's hiding place, showering her with stone fragments. She stifled a scream, pressing herself flatter against the unyielding rock. Red Hawk ducked back fully behind the boulders, reloading with blinding, practiced speed, his movements, economical, efficient, deadly calm. He exchanged shots carefully with the remaining two men, the narrow canyon amplifying the deafening roar of the guns into a terrifying cacophony. Elena pressed her hands over her ears, trembling uncontrollably, but also awed by Red Hawk's calm, focused deadliness. He wasn't fighting with the hot rage he'd shown Barlow, but with a cold, calculated efficiency, protecting them both, anticipating their moves. One of the men, the one uninjured, tried to dismount and flank him on foot, scrambling up the rocky slope opposite their position. Red Hawk seemed to anticipate the move before it happened, shifting his position slightly, tracking the man's progress, waiting for a clear shot. He fired again. A strangled cry, abruptly cut off, echoed through the canyon. Silence fell, heavy and sudden, broken only by the panicked whinnying of the wounded man's horse. The last rider, the one clutching his bleeding shoulder, stared wildly for a moment at the spot where his companion had fallen, then at the unmoving rocks shielding the deadly Comanche warrior, his face contorted with fear and pain. He yanked savagely on his horse's reins, spurring the terrified animal back down the canyon the way they had come, fleeing as fast as the treacherous terrain would allow, unwilling to face the silent, lethal warrior alone any longer. Red Hawk remained motionless for several long moments, listening intently, his head cocked, making absolutely sure the threat was truly gone, that it wasn't a trick. Then, slowly, cautiously, he lowered his rifle, the tension gradually easing from his shoulders. He moved out from the boulders, checking the fallen men, one dead from the fall or the shot, the other unconscious but breathing shallowly from the tomahawk blow. He efficiently took their remaining ammunition and water skins, leaving their weapons untouched on the ground. He gave a low whistle, and his paint horse, unharmed, trotted back down the canyon towards him from where it had hidden itself. He came back to the crevice where Elena waited, still trembling, her eyes wide with shock and fear. He looked down at her, his face grim, streaked with sweat and dust beneath the fading paint. But the immediate, lethal intensity had faded, replaced by a weary relief. "It is over," he said quietly. "They will not follow further. The wounded one will carry the tale back, if he makes it. They will know this place is death for them." Elena looked from the still, sprawled forms on the canyon floor, stark reminders of the brutal reality of this land. Then back up at Red Hawk. He had killed again, had fought with terrifying ferocity to protect them, to protect her. He was a man shaped by violence, born of a violent land, responding to violence with lethal efficiency. Yet, he had saved her life, not once, but multiple times now. Her fear of him, the primal fear of the savage warrior, was slowly, confusingly being replaced by a complex, unsettling mix of profound gratitude, grudging respect, and something deeper. Something more disturbing that she couldn't yet name or acknowledge. "Thank you," she said again, her voice shaking slightly, the words feeling utterly inadequate. He merely nodded curtly, reaching down to help her up, his hand strong and steady under her elbow. "We must go. This place holds death now. We cannot linger." They mounted the paint horse, Red Hawk retrieving the supplies from the fallen men, and rode on, deeper into the maze of the breaks, leaving the site of the brief, brutal conflict behind them as the sun began to dip towards the western horizon, painting the high canyon walls in dramatic hues of blood orange, deep purple, and bruised lavender. They found a sheltered spot near a small, hidden seep of clear water trickling from the rocks and made a quiet, somber camp. That night, the silence between them felt different, charged with the raw intimacy of shared violence and survival. Elena, using a strip torn from the hem of her ruined satin dress retrieved from Red Hawk's pack and water from the seep, gently cleaned a superficial graze on Red Hawk's forearm from a ricocheting bullet fragment she hadn't noticed earlier. Her touch was hesitant at first, then gentle, careful. He allowed it, sitting unusually still, his usual stoicism momentarily softened by weariness, watching her face in the flickering firelight. They were no longer just a Comanche warrior bent on vengeance and a rescued white woman. They were two solitary souls irrevocably bound by the harsh realities of the frontier, learning, tentatively, hesitantly, to trust each other in the face of shared danger and profound loss. The Llano Estacado, his home, lay somewhere ahead, beyond the breaks, promising sanctuary but also new, unknown challenges and uncertainties. The Llano Estacado stretched before them, vast, seemingly endless, terrifyingly beautiful in its stark emptiness. It was a great, high sea of grass rippling under an immense, achingly blue sky, appearing utterly featureless to Elena's untrained eyes. Yet Red Hawk navigated it with an unerring, quiet confidence, as if reading an invisible map inscribed on the wind and the earth. He pointed out landmarks invisible to her, a particular subtle rise in the land, a distant mesa shaped like a sleeping giant, the subtle shifts in the types of grasses, the direction of the prevailing wind. This was his world, the heart of Comancheria, and he moved through it not as a traveler, but as an integral part of the landscape itself. With the quiet assurance of deep belonging, Elena felt like an awkward child learning to walk again. The skills she possessed from her previous life, reading books, keeping a neat house, knowing social etiquette, basic arithmetic, were utterly useless here. Survival depended on an entirely different, more ancient knowledge, finding water in unlikely places, reading the faintest tracks in the dust or grass, understanding the sudden, violent moods of the weather, knowing which plants healed and which poisoned, which creatures were dangerous predators and which could provide sustenance. Red Hawk proved to be a patient, if taciturn, teacher. Actions spoke louder than words. He showed her how the Numman, his people, used every single part of the buffalo, the animal that sustained their entire way of life, the meat for food, the hides for tipis and clothing, the bones for tools, the sinew for thread. He explained how they followed the great herds across the plains, their lives intricately woven into the rhythms of the seasons and the migrations. He taught her simple words in his language. Namantiti tekwap, the sounds guttural and melodic, so different from English. Simple words at first: paya, water; puku, horse; ora, thank you; tka, eat. She stumbled over the unfamiliar sounds, her tongue clumsy, but she persisted, driven by a deep desire to bridge the vast gulf between their worlds, to show respect, to understand. He would listen patiently, sometimes offering a quiet correction, a rare flicker of approval crossing his stoic features when she finally pronounced a word correctly. As they traveled deeper into the heart of the Llano Estacado, they began to see subtle signs of his people, faint smoke signals rising like prayers on the distant horizon, expertly hidden trail markers only he could decipher, the occasional distant sighting of hunters on horseback, moving with incredible speed and grace across the plains, becoming one with their mounts. Red Hawk became subtly more relaxed, the constant, wary vigilance easing slightly, though it never disappeared entirely. A lifetime of alertness was ingrained too deeply. He began to hum softly sometimes as they rode, ancient, rhythmic melodies that seemed to rise from the earth itself. One afternoon, after days of riding across the seemingly endless expanse, they crested a low, grassy rise, and below them, nestled in a wide bend of a meandering, cottonwood-lined river, lay a large encampment, tipis, dozens of them, perhaps more. Conical structures of tanned buffalo hide stretched over lodgepoles, stood scattered across the plain. Many were painted with intricate symbols and geometric designs, vibrant depictions of hunts, battles, and spiritual visions, histories, and identities proclaimed to the world. Smoke curled lazily, peacefully, from cooking fires dotted throughout the camp. A vast herd of horses, hundreds strong, grazed peacefully in a large, natural pasture nearby, watched over by young boys. The sounds of life drifted up to them on the clear air, children laughing and shouting at their games, dogs barking greetings or warnings, the rhythmic thud of a woman pounding dried meat. This was Red Hawk's village, his home. Apprehension tightened Elena's chest like a cold fist. How would these people, the people, react to her presence? A white woman, an outsider, brought into their midst by one of their own warriors. Would they see her as an enemy, a remnant of the encroaching world that threatened their existence? A curiosity, a burden, or worse? She instinctively pulled back slightly on the horse. Red Hawk seemed to sense her sudden unease, the tremor that ran through her. He half turned in the saddle. "You are with me, Elena," he said, his voice low but firm, meant to reassure. "They will know you are under my protection. Stand tall beside me." Show no fear in your eyes. Fear invites contempt. He urged the horse forward, down the gentle slope towards the bustling camp. As they approached, activity gradually paused. Heads turned. Faces, framed by long black hair, watched them. Their expressions ranging from open curiosity to guarded suspicion. Questioning, eyes lingered on Elena, on her deerskin clothes that marked her as adopted, but couldn't hide her pale skin. Her lighter hair tucked hastily under a borrowed scarf Red Hawk had given her. The silence felt heavy, charged with unspoken thoughts, judgments, memories of past encounters with her kind. Red Hawk rode straight and proud, neither defiant nor apologetic, guiding the horse towards a large, impressively painted teepee set near the center of the camp, presumably belonging to the chief or an important elder. He dismounted smoothly and reached up to help Elena down, his hand lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary on her arm before he let go. He stood beside her, a silent, protective presence. As several prominent figures approached them, older men with faces like carved, weathered landscapes, their bearing dignified and imposing, their eyes sharp and intelligent. They wore buckskin leggings, breechcloths, and ornate vests decorated with beadwork and quillwork. Their faces were stern but not immediately hostile. Red Hawk spoke first, his voice respectful but firm, using the flowing, rhythmic cadence of his own language. He gestured briefly towards Elena, explaining, she assumed, the circumstances of her arrival, the escape from Barlow, the journey, his decision to bring her here. The elders listened intently, their piercing gazes shifting between the warrior they clearly respected and the unexpected stranger at his side. One grizzled warrior, with a fearsome scar running down one cheek, eyed Elena with open distrust, his hand resting near the knife at his belt. Elena named him Stone Hand in her mind. She stood as straight and tall as she could, remembering Red Hawk's instruction. She met their direct gazes without flinching, trying to convey respect, humility, and the absence of any threat, hoping they could somehow see the truth of her situation beyond her skin color. An older man, clearly the leader, his face deeply lined like a dry riverbed, his long hair streaked with gray, his presence radiating quiet authority, stepped forward. He wore a magnificent eagle feather headdress that signified his status. He spoke to Red Hawk at length, his voice deep and resonant, then turned his piercing, assessing gaze fully on Elena. He spoke again, slowly, deliberately, in his own tongue. The words directed at her but spoken through Red Hawk. Red Hawk translated, his voice neutral. Chief Iron Shirt asks why I bring a Hatakuniwap, white woman, into the heart of our lands. He says our people have suffered much treachery and loss at the hands of your kind. He asks if you bring their sickness, their lies. Elena took a steadying breath, ignoring the hostile stare of Stone Hand. Tell him, she said, her voice clear and steady, surprising herself with her own resolve, that my own kind betrayed me most cruelly. Tell him I was sold like an animal, held captive in a place of shame and despair. Tell him Red Hawk, your brave warrior, saved me from that life, showed me unexpected mercy. She met the chief's gaze directly. I seek only refuge. Chief Iron Shirt, I mean no harm to your people. I wish only to learn your ways, to earn my keep, to live in peace, if you will allow it. Red Hawk translated her words faithfully. Chief Iron Shirt listened, his expression remaining unreadable, his dark eyes seeming to look straight into her soul. He considered her for a long, silent moment, his gaze unwavering. Then he spoke again, shorter this time, to Red Hawk, his tone carrying weight. He says you speak with a straight tongue. Red Hawk relayed, a hint of relief softening his own features. He sees truth in your eyes, and much pain. He sees you are not like the others who come only to take, to destroy. He says, "You may stay, for now." He paused. "You will live in the teepee of Willow Woman, an elder whose husband has walked on, whose children are grown. She is wise in the ways of our people. You will learn from her. Your place among us is not given freely. It must be earned." Elena. Relief washed over Elena, so potent, so overwhelming. It almost buckled her knees. She had been granted sanctuary, a chance. She nodded her profound thanks to the chief, murmuring the Comanche word Red Hawk had taught her. Ura, Yura, thank you, thank you. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the chief's weathered lips for an instant. He nodded curtly in acknowledgement, before turning away to speak with the other elders. The immediate crisis of her arrival seemingly resolved, at least for the moment. Stone Hand still looked unconvinced, his gaze lingering on her with suspicion before he too turned away. Willow Woman was introduced, a small, wiry woman, older than Elena's own mother would have been, with incredibly bright, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and hands roughened and capable from a lifetime of hard work. Her face was a map of wrinkles, but her posture was straight, her movements nimble. She looked Elena up and down thoroughly, her gaze sharp, assessing, but not unkind. After a moment, she gave a single nod and gestured, wordlessly, for Elena to follow her. Red Hawk gave Elena a brief, reassuring glance before turning to speak with the chief and other warriors. Elena was on her own now, taking another deep breath. She followed the elder woman towards a smaller, neatly kept tipi set slightly apart from the main cluster, towards the beginning of her new, utterly unknown life. Life in the Comanche camp was entirely different from anything Elena had ever known. A world away from the constrained order of her Kansas farm life and the fetid nightmare of the gilded cage. It was intensely communal, physically demanding, yet deeply, intrinsically connected to the earth, the sky, the animals, and the rhythms of nature in a way she had never imagined possible. Every day was a lesson in survival, community, and respect for the world around her. Under Willow Woman's patient, observant tutelage, Elena began the arduous process of learning the essential skills of a Comanche woman. Willow Woman communicated mostly through gestures, demonstration, and a growing vocabulary of shared Comanche and English words, supplemented by occasional translations from Red Hawk or other bilingual members of the tribe when he was present. Elena learned the back-breaking work of scraping and tanning buffalo hides, transforming the stiff, raw skins into soft, pliable leather suitable for clothing, moccasins, and teepee covers. Her hands, already calloused from farm work, grew stronger, rougher, often aching by day's end, but she found a deep satisfaction in the tangible results of her labor. She learned the intricate, beautiful art of beadwork, painstakingly sewing tiny, colorful glass beads onto leather with sinew thread, creating patterns that held deep cultural meaning. Patterns Willow Woman patiently explained. She learned to sew sturdy, comfortable moccasins and leggings, far superior to any shoes she had ever worn. She spent long hours with Willow Woman and other women gathering plants on the prairie, learning which roots were edible, which berries were sweet or medicinal, which leaves could be used for teas or poultices. She learned how to find water sources, how to dry meat into jerky over a slow fire to preserve it for leaner times, how to grind wild grains, how to prepare food using simple but effective techniques perfected over generations. It wasn't easy. She made countless mistakes, endured the quiet, good-natured laughter, or occasionally stern corrections when she fumbled a task or misunderstood an instruction. Her attempts at speaking "nunamteen tekwapi" often resulted in tangled pronunciations that amused the children, who were often the most direct and curious, sometimes pointing and whispering about the tekwaniwap until their mothers gently shushed them. Some adults remained distant, their eyes holding suspicion or the remembered pain of past conflicts and betrayals by white settlers, soldiers, or buffalo hunters encroaching on their lands. Stone, Hand, the scarred warrior, made his distrust clear through pointed silence and disapproving glares whenever she crossed his path. But Elena persisted, driven by gratitude and a growing desire to truly belong, not just to exist on the fringes. She worked tirelessly, rising before dawn with the other women, showing respect for their customs and traditions, keeping her heart open, listening more than she spoke. She learned to observe the subtle social cues, the unspoken rules of conduct within the camp. Willow Woman, initially reserved and watchful, slowly warmed to Elena's quiet determination and genuine effort. The elder woman began to share more than just practical skills. She shared stories of her youth, legends of the people, wisdom passed down through generations, and eventually, a quiet, grandmotherly affection bloomed between them. Elena found a surrogate grandmother, a mentor, and a source of profound strength and guidance in the wise, resilient elder. Willow Woman's small, tidy teepee became a sanctuary, a place of learning and quiet companionship. Elena saw Red Hawk often, though their interactions within the bustling life of the camp were usually brief, governed by the unspoken rules and proprieties of the community. He was a respected warrior, often away for days at a time, on hunts for buffalo or antelope, or on patrols scouting the vast territory for intruders or signs of enemies. When he was in the village, his presence was a quiet, grounding reassurance for Elena. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the flickering cooking fires during evening meals, or during communal gatherings, a silent acknowledgement of the perilous journey they had shared. The unspoken bond forged in fire, flight, and mutual vulnerability, Elena realized, with a growing sense of confusion and trepidation, that her feelings for him ran deeper than simple gratitude. A profound respect had blossomed into something more tender, more complex, something she kept carefully hidden in the deepest corners of her heart, unsure if such feelings could ever be returned or even accepted. Between two people from such vastly different worlds, both carrying deep wounds from their pasts, she knew the barriers were immense: cultural differences, the memory of his family's fate at the hands of white men, her own uncertain future, and the ever-present ache for her lost son. She learned more about Red Hawk indirectly, primarily from Willow Woman, who spoke of him with a mixture of pride and sadness. He was known throughout the bands for his exceptional bravery, his unmatched skill as a hunter and tracker, but also for the deep, enduring sadness he carried since the tragic loss of his entire family years ago. His act of bringing Elena, a white woman, into the camp and placing her under his protection was seen by some, like Chief Ironshirt, as an honorable act of compassion, fulfilling an obligation he felt towards her vulnerability, which reminded him of Nakona. Others, like Stone Hand and his faction, viewed it as reckless, potentially dangerous, a Pakeha woman in their midst, a possible spy or source of future trouble. He rarely spoke of his past himself, preferring silence, but his actions, consistently providing fresh meat for Willow Woman and Elena's teepee, ensuring they lacked for nothing essential. His watchful presence when potential threats arose spoke volumes about his sense of responsibility. One cool evening, under a sky ablaze with countless stars, the camp gathered for a large celebration following a particularly successful buffalo hunt that promised abundance for the coming months. Drums throbbed like a great heart, pulsing through the earth, resonating deep within Elena's chest. Dancers, adorned in feathers and paint, moved around the roaring central bonfire, their powerful, rhythmic movements telling ancient stories of the hunt, of bravery, of connection to the buffalo spirit, of gratitude to the Creator. Elena sat with Willow Woman near the edge of the firelight, mesmerized, feeling strangely, unexpectedly at home in this vibrant, powerful display of community and culture. Red Hawk was among the dancers, his lean body moving with fluid grace and power, his expression serious, focused, almost transcendent in the flickering firelight. He seemed a different man here, fully immersed in the spirit of his people, shedding some of the watchful tension he usually carried. Later, as the celebration began to wind down, the drumming softening, the crowd thinning, he sought her out. He found her standing alone by the murmuring river, watching the moonlight shimmer like liquid silver on the dark water, lost in thought, thoughts of Samuel, thoughts of this strange new life, thoughts of the enigmatic warrior who had brought her here. "You are learning our ways, Elena," he observed, coming to stand beside her, his voice soft, blending with the sounds of the river and the distant camp. "I try," Elena replied, turning to face him. The faint scent of wood smoke clung to him. "Willow Woman is a very patient teacher. Your people, most of them, have been kind, accepting." She hesitated, then added softly, "Except, perhaps, for Stonehand." Red Hawk's expression tightened slightly at the mention of the other warrior. "Stonehand carries old wounds from the soldiers. He trusts no outsiders. Pay him no mind. Your actions speak for you." He paused, looking out at the river, the moonlight catching the high planes of his face. "You work hard. You show respect. You learn. That is valued among the people." Another pause, longer this time. "Do you miss your old life, your son?" The question, though gently asked, pierced her heart like a shard of ice. "I miss my son," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion she couldn't quite suppress. "Every single day. Like a part of me is missing." She looked up at the vast, starry sky. "I pray he is safe, that he remembers me. That one day, maybe, somehow." She couldn't finish the thought. The hope felt too fragile, too distant. As for her old life, the life with Jedediah before the betrayal, the life before the gilded cage, it felt like a lifetime ago, like a story belonging to a different, naive person she no longer recognized. That life is gone, built on lies, betrayed. She looked around at the peaceful camp, listened to the gentle sounds of the river. This life is real. Hard, yes, but real. He nodded slowly, his eyes holding a deep understanding born of his own losses. "This life is hard," he agreed quietly. "The prairie demands much, but it is honest. Here, a person is judged by their actions, by their heart, their courage, their contribution to the people, not by the color of their skin or the empty promises they make." He looked directly at her then, his dark eyes searching her face in the soft moonlight. "You have proven your heart, Elena. You have shown courage." He used her name again. It still felt significant, intimate, a bridge across the chasm separating their worlds. "And you, Red Hawk," she said softly, finding the courage to ask the question that lingered always in the back of her mind. "You saved me. You fought for me. You brought me here, to your home, protected me. Why? Was it truly only because I reminded you of Nakona?" He looked away, his gaze fixed on the vast, dark plains stretching out under the silent stars, a landscape that held both his history and his future. "At first, yes," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Seeing your fear, your helplessness in Barlow's grasp, it brought back the pain, the rage, the failure I felt over Nakona, letting you go free. It was a blow against him, against what he did to her. He turned back to her, his expression intense, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. But it became more than that. On the journey, I saw your strength, Elena. Your spirit refused to break. Even after everything, you faced the danger, the hardship, without complaint. You learned. You endured. He took a hesitant step closer. It reminded me that even after great loss, life finds a way. That courage is not the absence of fear, but action, despite fear. Your spirit, it rekindled something in me. He hesitated, then spoke the words that hung unspoken between them. You belong here now, Elena, among the people, if you choose it. Tears welled in Elena's eyes, blurring the moonlight. But they were not tears of sadness or fear this time. They were tears of profound release, of unexpected, overwhelming belonging. Here, among people so different from her own, people her former world considered savages, she had found a measure of acceptance, respect, a sense of community she hadn't known she was missing. Here, with this fierce, quiet warrior who carried his own deep wounds, she felt seen, understood, valued for who she was proving herself to be, not for who she had been or where she came from. I choose it, she whispered, the words catching in her throat, thick with emotion. This is my home now. A faint, rare smile touched Red Hawk's lips, reaching his dark eyes this time. Softening the harsh lines etched by grief and hardship, he reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek, a touch that lingered for a breathless moment. It was a simple gesture, tentative yet profound, speaking volumes across the silent space between them, a silent acknowledgement of the deep, complex bond that had grown unexpectedly between them, a bond forged in the crucible of fire and flight, nurtured by shared hardship, mutual respect, and the slow, cautious awakening of something fragile and new. In the heart of the Comanche camp, under the vast, ever-changing expanse of the prairie sky, Elena, the woman sold and betrayed, the woman rescued by vengeance, began to truly build a new life, weaving her own thread into the intricate tapestry of the people. She continued to learn the language, her tongue gradually mastering the difficult sounds, finding joy in simple conversations with Willow Woman or the curious children who slowly lost their shyness around her. She embraced the culture, not as an outsider mimicking customs, but with genuine respect and a growing understanding of the deep spiritual connection the Inanan held with the land, the animals, the seasons. Months turned into a year. Seasons changed on the Llano Estacado. The harsh winds of winter gave way to the vibrant wildflowers of spring, followed by the baking heat of summer and the golden hues of autumn. Elena's skin darkened under the sun. Her body grew leaner, stronger, her movements more assured. She learned to ride with skill, to contribute meaningfully to the daily tasks of the camp. Her proficiency in tanning hides and intricate beadwork earning quiet nods of approval from the other women. One winter, when a sickness swept through the camp, her remembered knowledge of basic wound care and herbal remedies learned from her own mother back east proved unexpectedly helpful, easing the suffering of a few children and earning her a measure of deeper respect, even from some who had initially remained suspicious. Though Stone Hand's disapproval remained a constant, silent presence. Slowly, carefully, Elena began to open her heart to the possibility of finding happiness again, perhaps even love, not the naive, trusting love of her youth, that had been so brutally shattered, but a deeper, more resilient love born from shared hardship, profound respect, and quiet understanding. Her connection with Red Hawk deepened, slowly, tentatively, like a prairie flower unfolding cautiously after a long winter. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic pronouncements. Their bond grew in shared silences, in exchanged glances across a crowded tipi, in his quiet presence ensuring her safety on gathering expeditions, in her mending his hunting gear, in the simple comfort of knowing the other was near. They were two wounded souls finding solace and strength in each other's company, navigating the complex landscape of their shared pasts and uncertain future. The lingering shadow of Stonehand's disapproval, and the silent question of how their deepening bond would be truly accepted by the tribe, remained an unspoken tension. She found her true family not in the blood ties broken by Jedediah's betrayal, a betrayal she heard whispers of eventually, rumors carried on the wind by traders that he had met a grim, lonely end in a nameless frontier town, consumed by debt and drink, but in the community that had taken her in. She found it in the enduring wisdom and quiet affection of Willow Woman, in the laughter of the children she sometimes watched over, and in the quiet strength and unexpected tenderness of the warrior who had saved her, the warrior who was slowly, cautiously letting her see the man behind the legend, the man seeking purpose beyond vengeance. The gilded cage became a fading nightmare, a distant, ugly scar almost healed over. It was replaced by the wide open freedom of the plains, the vastness of the sky, and the enduring, resilient spirit of the untamed mind. The people who had shown her the true meaning of resilience, community, and home. Her journey was far from over. The hope of seeing Samuel again remained a distant, guiding star, a constant ache deep within her soul that she steered her life by. A hope she now shared hesitantly with Red Hawk, who listened with quiet understanding. But she was no longer adrift, no longer alone, and drowning in despair. She had found her anchor in the heart of the Llano Estacado, rooted in the red earth, sheltered by a community, and guarded by the love of a warrior learning to live again. The future was uncertain, fraught with potential dangers from the encroaching outside world and challenges from within. But for the first time since Jedediah had changed, Elena faced it not with fear, but with a quiet strength and a resilient, hard-won hope.